Are Trump's tariffs really about the economy?
He likes tariffs because it's something he can do. He can react to world events. Bolsonaro being prosecuted in Brazil and say, right, I don't like that, I'm going to impose tariffs. I don't like the way that India didn't nominate me for the Nobel Peace Prize, or they're buying Russian oil, I'm going to impose tariffs.
With prices still stubbornly high, questions are growing about Trump's economic policies. Trump isn't the only one. Keir Starmer is also facing questions around his chaotic budget rollout last week.
To the public, there is no idea of what the aim of the Labour Party is, and that explains why it's unpopular.
To get to the bottom of it all, I spoke to award-winning financial journalist and author Philip Coggan, who sees Trump's appeal and Starmer's woes as part of a bigger problem, don't we all?
Without economic growth, democracies really struggle. It's all about a zero-sum game, and it has created this enormous dissatisfaction among the general public, who have tried centre-left governments and have thrown them out, and tried centre-right governments and have thrown them out, and are just looking for any other type of person who comes.
So if democracies have all failed to actually make economic policy, can they survive without economic growth? Let's order this disorder. I'm Jason Pack, and this is Disorder, a show where we search very hard to find a semblance of order in our mad, 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 mad world. Today, we are going to delve into the economic consequences of Mr. Trump by unpacking a book of that exact name with its author, Philip Coggan. Philip is a former economist and FT journalist, and his books, Money Machine, Paper Promises, and more, The 10,000-Year Rise of the World Economy, are among the best explainers for how neoliberalism has created the world around us. So without further ado, welcome Philip Coggan to Disorder. This episode is hosted in collaboration with the New Books Network, and NBN is a place where serious authors from the academy to the journalistic world to the expert community explain their books in bite-sized, accessible pieces, hitting the general public and the expert audience at the same time. The title of your work evokes Keynes's scathing attack, The Economic Consequences of Mr. Churchill. Could you explain what are the parallels 100 years apart between Churchill taking Britain back on the gold standard and Trump's haphazard tariffs and then walk back of Liberation Day?
Well, I deliberately chose the title because it was 100 years to the day, and the decision of Churchill to go back on the gold standard, Keynes responded very quickly with a similar sized book to mine, arguing it was a great policy mistake. And I think that the sudden imposition of tariffs, the breaking up really of the order that had existed since 1945, of the international financial order, in which after the Second World War, the US under Truman and General Marshall provided aid to European countries to help them recover because they recognized that they were good customers for US businesses, and gradually dismantled the barriers to trade that had existed in the 1930s and had worsened the Depression. All of that was put together where there was a cooperation. The US was the global leader, and the US soft power was enhanced by that policy. All of this was put into reverse by the events of April the 2nd, Liberation Day. And why is it important? It's important because I think it also undermines 250 years of what we know about economics.
The deep history that you are getting at shows you what Ecclesiastes wrote in the Bible 3,000 years ago. The Hebrew is Kohelet. There is nothing new under the sun. The fundamental questions of humanity, what is greed, what is value, haven't changed. And those of what is a tariffs, what is a deficit, what is economic efficiency, they're all the same. So of course, it doesn't matter if the widgets are GPUs and the services in the economy ping-pong across the globe in 2 seconds, or if you're exporting, spun cloth. The fundamental principles are the same, yes?
Yes, absolutely. And one of those fundamental principles, which was noted by the ancient Greeks, is specialization. So we specialize so that we can produce what we're best at producing, give that to someone else, trade that with someone else, and then buy what we need with what we've earned from what we specialize in. So it might be writing books, It might be being a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. And what's true for individuals is also true for countries. In Scotland, they could create heated greenhouses, grow grapes, and produce their own wine, and then try and sell it to other countries. But it's much cheaper for Scotland to focus on making whiskey and buy the wine from hot countries. And so there are a whole host of those examples.
I'll give a great one. So Gaddafi believed in autarky. And as you
Yeah.
may know, and the listeners all do, I'm a Libya expert.
Yes.
And in the Green Book, he talks about how the truly safe and secure country produces everything that it needs. He was very happy to use the groundwater from around Kufra in southern Libya, take it to the north, irrigate the desert, spend tons of money to bring soil in there to make a tomato that costs 9 times as much as an Italian tomato and tastes less good. And the implications of this are merely wasting money and hurting the environment. There is no logic, if you're sitting in North Africa, to create a tomato that costs 9 times as much as it does to import an Italian tomato. So this delusion has existed in a million different forms.
Absolutely.
When we get at Trump's delusion about tariffs, though, is he not onto something, though, which is that he is going to show the world how central the U.S. is to the global economy and how much pain it can cause others?
Well, he certainly has managed to do that, but what's the point of that? Both Truman and Marshall showed the world economy by helping other countries, and by helping those other countries, their GDP grew. They were great customers for the brands that the US have, whether it's Ford, General Motors, Coca-Cola, American films, American music, all of which vastly enhanced American prosperity over the subsequent period. And I think the great problem with what the way he looks at it is he doesn't understand the global supply chain. So it's not that America produces American cars. America produces cars which are made up significantly of components and raw materials imported from overseas. 45% of what the US imports are components and raw materials that go into things the US makes. And so when you impose tariffs on those imports, you increase the prices of your domestic producers. So yes, you may create some jobs in some industries, but you hurt all the other industries which are using imported goods. And if you're then saying, yes, we've got to make it all internally, then that goes back to your Libyan example. It's just to misunderstand how the world works best. And it's all back to that specialization thought that the Greeks had and Adam Smith amplified.
Yeah, nothing new under the sun. And you're using the developments of the tariffs and Trump in a way to teach the world an economy lesson. And the most important one of those things is in your chapter 1 of the book, which you brilliantly title, "Where There Is Order, Let There Be Chaos." Why do you believe he is doing something which is the greatest own goal and the $7 trillion destruction of value to the American economy?
Well, there was a great saying, I think, by Talleyrand after the Bourbon kings came back in 1815, after the Napoleonic era, that they'd learnt nothing and forgotten nothing from the period after Louis XVI was executed. And he learnt about tariffs and economic policy in the 1980s. And that has been his policy ever since. He was first upset by Japan, and he has stuck with the view that tariffs are good, imports are bad, ever over the last 40 years. I think he likes tariffs because it's something he can do. He can react to world events. Bolsonaro being prosecuted in Brazil and say, right, I don't like that, I'm going to impose tariffs. I don't like the way that India didn't nominate me for the Nobel Peace Prize, or they're buying Russian oil, I'm going to impose tariffs. If countries threaten to limit emissions of merchant ships to try and reduce carbon emissions, I'm going to impose tariffs on them. So it's a club with which he can use. It's a kind of hammer on every nail.
Your analysis then is that he is a statist, and the tariffs are something that further centralize power, because in an Adam Smithian world of an efficient market, power is decentralized between different actors. And in a Hayekian world, information flows with market prices. Tariffs take economic power and they put it in the center where one petulant man who wants to support his allies in Argentina and hurt his enemies in the EU has centralized power to himself. I think that you're being too rational. So allow us to disagree agreeably.
Yeah.
I think that that is a partial byproduct of a much less calculated policy. Many of his policies have the implication of centralizing power to him, but not all. I believe that his views about migration do not actually centralize policy. Let's play this thought experiment. I occasionally meet Republican friends who say, Jason, we have too many migrants. They can't even speak English. They're illegals. Let's get them out and have legal migration. To which I say, that is a reasonable argument, sir. But that's not what the Trumpian policies are. ICE is not a Gestapo that goes around and looks for people's papers and rationally deports them in a systematic manner and then allows, quote unquote, skilled migrants to rationally apply. It is total chaos. They deport some, they don't deport others. There are random roundups. We're not overhauling or making consulates in Mexico and Bangalore to properly bring in people. It's purely chaos. So he could be using the migration crisis to genuinely have Stephen Miller become the evil genius, making a point system. Aha, this one has his master's degree. This one is a great gardener. Let's keep him. They're not doing that.
No.
So I just don't think that there is a logic of actually using the tariffs to rationally centralize power. What say you?
No, well, that's a fair point. I think it's not. I don't believe he has a rational plan at all. In the book, I say he's not playing three-dimensional chess. He's playing darts with a javelin, and all he's achieving by darts with a javelin is to smash the board and create collateral damage on everybody around him. No, I think he's guided by impulse, and it doesn't. When the original tariff formula, of course, didn't make sense. It was based on goods, not services. It applied tariffs to countries with which the US actually had a trade surplus, which includes Brazil and the UK, and with which it's pretty much balanced. I think immigration is a very interesting example while we're on it. If you want the US economy to grow, you need the labor force to grow. And I think something like 88% of the growth in the labor force in recent years has come from immigration. So if you stop all immigration, the latest forecast I've seen is that the US workforce will decline. And if the US workforce declines, then all the growth in the economy has to come from productivity. And that's quite difficult. Productivity last year or so has been okay, but the last 15 years has not been good at all. So it doesn't add up at all. Now, he has on a time said, well, actually, we do need H-1B visa people to come in. But then, of course, at times he's also made it much more difficult. He's discouraged foreign students from coming, and foreign students are the people who eventually will become the intelligent workers who, staff the US economy. So, well, probably slightly at, touching on how our argument goes. It's all about him exercising his prejudices, let's say, rather than having any rational plan.
Well, that is your argument. Again, you write in the book, analyzing Trump's economic policy is rather like nailing jelly to a wall. I'm going to put forth another argument because this is an important enough point that I wish to belabor it, my dear mega orderers, and try to get us to some learning here. Are modern tariffs primarily economic tools, or are they political theater? And I'm going to now say that maybe because they are deliberately disordering, they are political theater. Yes, that they may centralize power, and I agree that they have some of the impact that Philip has written that they do. But let's talk about the political theater impact. If you are the world's greatest expert at controlling the news cycle, you put on the tariffs, you take them off. You argue with this, 90-day suspension, 20-day suspension. 89%, 140%, 20%. We renegotiated. We got a deal. look, the British, we have a deal. And the deal is essentially the status quo ante before there was a deal. We went from 10% to then 10%. So could it be that there is a megaphone policy here, which the man has cracked global media, whether he needs to get Epstein out of the news or to distract from economic woes, he has mastered the ability to move markets and the conversation by just having this megaphone, the bully pulpit times 20,000 Twitters.
I agree with you. Yes, he loves to use it as a way of capturing media attention, and I suppose as a part of the media, I'm as guilty as anybody by falling for that trick. The trouble is, I've spent 40 odd years writing out business and finance, and the one thing that businessmen and financiers always say is they don't like uncertainty. So if you want to grow the economy, to go back to what you're supposed to be doing to make the population of the US better off, then constantly finding for in businesses, they don't know how much it will cost to import goods from one day to the next. They don't know whether they can bring in foreign workers. They don't know whether there might be an embargo on some countries or not. This is not the way to encourage long-term investment. Now, yes, there is investment at the moment in one particular sector, which is artificial intelligence. But even there, you can say that his policy doesn't add up, because artificial intelligence and data centers require a whole new lot of energy. Electricity prices are moving higher, which is part of the affordability crisis. So you'd think you'd want more energy, but then he cancels renewable projects. His answer to that would be drill, baby, drill. Have number of oil wells gone up under Trump? The new wells being drilled, or gone down? They've gone down. Why have they gone down? Because the oil price is low. US oil production requires a high price to make it profitable. So you can have lots more US oil, or you can have a low oil price. You can't have both. Again, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up overall as an economic strategy. You're right, as a political strategy, you may say, but he's look at his popularity ratings. I'm not sure that's working either.
So he's so disorderly in his thinking that he wants many mutually contradictory outcomes. I just want to paraphrase what you've said.
Yes.
Here is a man who wants both a low oil price and high U.S. domestic production, when those two things are impossible. He doesn't understand that he wants it to be warm to go to the beach and cold to go skiing in the same location on the same day.
Right.
So this leads us to why. I think the why behind the man who wants it to be cold to go skiing and warm to go to the beach in the same location on the same day is wanting to deliberately disorder the information space, the economic space, and the political space, because the low information voter, the low information society is one where he can stay in power and Vance can become king and they can cancel our freedoms. And you may say that that's paranoid of me, but I voted with my feet, so I obviously believe it. Do you see that as the implication of these economic policies? Or would you just say, no, Jason, it's just that he doesn't understand economics?
No, I think it's certainly possible that he doesn't intend to allow free elections. That's we've had hints about it. Whether those hints are, again, a kind of catnip to make a media story for a day, and he's going to run again for a third term. Steve Bannon told The Economist that a couple of weeks ago, and maybe that was to distract from some other story in the news. But obviously, we did have free elections just a few weeks ago, and the Democrats did very well, and the Republicans didn't do well. We'll see if we get free elections in the midterms. Obviously, the Texas redistricting has been blocked in the courts so far, and the Californians haven't. So, that's not going brilliantly. I think the other fact we haven't mentioned is that, and this is what studies show over decades, is that tariffs are linked to corruption. So if you have tariffs, then some producers will want to argue to you that you should push up the tariffs to keep out their foreign competitors, and other producers will say, no, let's keep down the tariffs because I need to import raw materials to make my goods. who do you have to go to ask for these lower or higher tariffs? There's no point going to Congress because they're not doing it. You have to go to the one man who's deciding, and that's the president.
You write, the Trump administration is determined to smash this trading system, but it is far from clear what it would like to see in its place. The strongest impression one gets is that the smashing is the main point. Now, that's what I believe. That's the disorder. It's about the smashing. So could you expand on this and explain what about the IMF and the Bretton Woods and the post-1945 order in specific he's trying to smash?
Well, the IMF, the World Bank, GATT, which was the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and then succeeded by the World Trade Organization. These are all agreements in which nations agree to pool sovereignty, whether it's a fund or whatever, and then subsequently act in a collective good to try and help individual countries or solve particular problems. And this goes under the general all-purpose term to Trump and other populists as globalism, right? It can be used as an anti-Semitic slur sometimes, but that's what they're really talking about. And he does not want the power of the US, and of course the power of the US president, to be limited in any way by any constraints on the other. So he doesn't really like NATO. Would he really come to the aid of Estonia or Latvia if they were invaded? So the smashing up does two things. One, it frees the US from these constraints and himself. And also it annoys the liberals, right? It annoys the people who I think he feels didn't give him enough respect. He's perceived snobbery towards him as just a property developer. Graydon Carter's jibe about him being a stubby-fingered vulgarian. Obama's jokes about him, back in 2011 or whatever. These are the people. This is the classic kind of. This is more an American thing than a British thing, but the college boy, the football player hates the college boy, as it were. The football fan hates the college boy who put him down and uses fancy words. And this kind of thing you see in American films and American culture for 70 or 80 years. And I know he went to college, but he has that kind of, you don't respect me enough. And because you don't respect me enough, I'm going to smash up everything that you like.
But there may be more. You write that part of what he does is he impacts a kind of Mao Zedong perpetual, continuous cultural revolution. Now, I argue that this is about the global enduring disorder, right? And for me, we are in a historic period whereby many actors, it's not just Putin, Trump, Orban, Bolsonaro, but the heads of multinational firms, various ideologists, leaders in the Middle East, certain other kinds of corporate, want to disorder for disorder's sake, and that this is fundamentally different than the way in which Stalin or Mussolini or Hitler, they had an alternative order. And now these guys, all they want is just disorder. So yes, it has psychological roots and Freudian baggage, but I think that there is a deep insight that Trump has, and he is not dumber than Putin. They both understand that a world in which Brexit has happened and the UK and EU don't negotiate their trade stuff together, that's good for me. A world in which NATO isn't working as a bloc, but every country has to have a bilateral thingy with us, and then we can pick and choose, that is really good for me. And that this view of disorder is not wrong for him. He has succeeded amazingly in disaggregating a range of U.S. allies from each other.
Yes, well, I think it's Thucydides: "The strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must." Is the quote.
Correct.
So he's very much along those lines, and I think you're quite right. The Maltzian disorder serves a number of purposes because he is dominating the headlines all the time, right? And he's obviously an attention junkie. It focuses power on him because he's the one taking the actions. And I suppose the broader question is, why have people like this come into power and are able to disrupt the system so much? And I wrote a book 12 years ago called The Last Vote, which was about the threats to Western democracy. In that, I worried that without economic growth of the kind that we saw from the 1945 pretty much through to 2005-6, democracies really struggle. People get bored with democracies just as they used to get bored with monarchies. And in France, there was an 1848 revolution because the public was bored, somebody famously said. And in a low growth democracy, it's all about a zero sum game, where to do anything, to give anybody a benefit, you have to take something away from someone else. In post 1945, you could create a welfare state and have higher living standards and have people have, the TVs and the microwaves and the cars that they wanted. But now it's much more difficult to do that. And it has created this enormous dissatisfaction among the general public, who have tried centre-left governments and have thrown them out, and tried centre-right governments and have thrown them out, and are just looking for any other type of person who comes. There's a quote from H.L. Mencken at the start of the book, which I may get wrong, but to any problem, there's a solution that is clear, simple, and completely wrong. And this is what populists offer. This kind of simple answer: blame the immigrants, blame foreigners, blame, and it's wrong.
We woke up this morning, Philip, and we heard that details of the British budget had been leaked before it was to be announced. I am going to set the stage from a non-British perspective, and then I would love you to give an overview of what has happened to the mega orderers. So, unlike in the US, here in the UK, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is the second most powerful person in the British government. They live at number 11 next to number 10. Isn't it quaint? They come out with a little red box. They show the little red box. They make a speech. And it's somehow important what is in this budget. It's not a continuing resolution. It's not, the question of threatening a government shutdown if people don't do it or not. What is it? What is the relevance of the budget? And why soever are people constrained by these stupid manifesto pledges? Who cares about manifestos? Why?
Right. So, let's answer the first part of it first. It is a long-established tradition, and going back to Gladstone, who's somebody I wrote about when I was at college, the budget speech could last 4 or 5 hours. The government is a government because it can command a majority in the House of Commons. It does not have to negotiate the budget with anybody else, with one exception I'll come to in history later. So it's not like this is a back and forth between Congress and the president.
Of course, there's no checks and balances here.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But
so what they announce, save in extraordinary circumstances, they can push through.
It is worth pointing out, of course, that not only in coalitions like David Cameron and Nick Clegg, that in theory you could defect, but there could be a situation where the hard left of the party, the Diane Abbotts of the party, would randomly not vote for the budget. So you do have to sell to some extent.
You do have to sell a bit, and sometimes that does happen. But by and large, the budget will go through. And it used to be that the House of Lords used to try and intervene in the budget, and this famously happened just over 100 years ago. And when they did that, there was a change in the law to make sure that the House of Lords lost a lot of its power. And that was Lloyd George's famous budget, which had inheritance tax and things like that.
And that was 1911.
1911, exactly. So that's extremely important for the government, because it not only sets out the details of individual taxes, it sets out all the spending policies as well. So it is really the main plank of the government's domestic program. Now, why is it such a ridiculous process? Ever since 2010, George Osborne brought in this Office for Budget Responsibility, the OPR, and they had to kind of run the slide rule over the budget and see whether the assumptions made in it were realistic. And you then have a series of fiscal rules, i.e. budgetary rules that chancellors agree to adopt, which the Office of Budget Responsibility OBR, I'll say from here on, has to say whether or not it's meeting those rules. Now, the particular rule we have at the moment is that the debt has to be falling as a proportion of GDP 5 years from now. So that allows for the fact that you've got to forecast what the economy will look 5 years from now, and you've got to assume that the government actually keeps those policies in place over the next 5 years. So if you look at today's budgets, there is an extension of a freeze on income tax thresholds, which means that more people are drawn into paying income tax at successfully higher rates from 2028 to 2031. Well, who knows what's going to be happening between 2028 and 2031? There's a tax on higher properties, higher value properties, also coming in from 2028. A charge on electric car driving, also 2028. So it's not like jam tomorrow, it's like gruel tomorrow. All the bad news is thrust into this far future. But the great news is that means those tax revenues can be accounted for 5 years from now. It means the government's going to meet these rules. And in the previous government, the Conservative government, what they did was say, we're cutting taxes now, but we're going to have this really aggressive cut down on spending for 4 years from now, and that means we'll meet the deficit. So it's a kind of kabuki play where they pretend to meet these targets, but as we all know, that's probably not going to happen.
What I want to ask you is, we have this budget, we have this tradition of the budget. It's supposed to have a degree of responsibility. You got the red box, you're showcasing, look, we've planned ahead. We're not going to have, this black hole. We have this budget headroom, blah, 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 blah. But it's been turned into a disorderly scandal. How could it be that the OBR could leak and then apologize for leaking some aspect of her budget before her speech? How is that even possible?
Well, I tend to believe in cock-ups rather than conspiracy of these kind of things. As far as I can see, they had to press a button to make their document live, and some intern or young person pressed it at 11 o'clock instead of 3 o'clock. And, having worked in enough big organizations, that kind of thing happens. So, yes, it's extremely unfortunate. It's a cock-up. And the good thing from the government's point of view is that the cost of UK borrowing fell before Rachel Reeves even got to stand up. So it wasn't like she was speaking in Kwasi Kwarteng 3 budgets ago, and the markets were plummeting as they spoke.
Right.
It was reasonably good.
It's not the mini budget scenario. She's not going to be hoisted on her own petards and forced out of office.
No, but not on that. Not on this. No.
Given where we are at now, if you were giving a piece of advice to the Labour government on how they should raise revenue, not what was contained in the budget, what would you suggest?
Yes, that's very interesting. Well, if you look at the way that the tax system has developed, it is that we have become a lot more progressive in the last 15 years. And the Conservatives under Osborne did do that. And we are actually, if you look at the overall impact of tax, middle earners don't pay as much tax as they do in some other countries. So I would have opted for the general rise in income tax as the cleanest way of doing it. Now, of course, that would have had a political cost, but then you reckon if the next election is 4 years away, by that stage, it might have been forgotten. They haven't technically breached their manifesto in anything they did today. The question is last year whether by pushing up employers' national insurance, this was really the equivalent of breaking the manifesto pledge on not raising national insurance, which they subsequently said, well, we meant employees' national insurance. To push up taxes generally, it was inevitable. So you then say, what's the best way to push up taxes? Income tax, VAT, national insurance, those are the 3 biggest ones. Income tax is probably the fairest one.
Okay, well, what I think as a foreigner is the thing that you need is actual property taxes. When you move to this country, and I've lived here off and on for 18 years now, Philip, you learn something that is absolutely fucking insane, which is that a £2 million house and a £1 million house can be in the same band of property tax, and the council taxes are so low relative to the amount of property. You can buy a pile somewhere and it just goes up in value and you don't even pay any taxes on it. You can own
Well,
land in
yeah.
the middle of Scotland and be paying absolutely nothing on that land, and you're not even using it in an economically productive way. This stuff is insane.
She
No
has done that,
major
of course.
country,
Yeah, yeah. She has
no
done that.
major
That's it.
country in the world
Yeah,
operates this way. It is absolutely insane. And then you
yeah.
wonder, why is it that people send their kids to private schools in this country? The answer is because the properties are not taxed. So in wealthy areas, they don't have money in the local council to pay for the kids to go to school. And all that money that could have been being spent on roads and bridges and tunnels and schools is spent on private school fees. It is the most insane system. And of course, the Tories will never do it because they're the party of the homeowners. Only a center right Labour, meaning center left overall, but center right within Labour, like Starmer, if he had come in guns a blazing and said, we're moving to normal country style, we tax the value of the property at about 1% per year, like any other country, we could have had this completely solved. But he doesn't do that. Why?
Well, they have raised property taxes on
But it's
higher
not a real property
value.
tax. It's not a
It's not
real
a full
property
property tax.
tax.
No, I mean it's its own way. It would be a wealth tax, right? So you're in the States. You have property taxes which vary by states.
They
So
vary
high
by municipalities. You could be living in
municipal,
Metuchen and pay
absolutely.
a different rate than in Edison.
The council tax is sort of in theory related to the value of your property, but it's not in practice. So the answer to that is to properly redo the council tax theory, which was council tax banding, which was done in the 1990s when it was brought in. The reason they don't do that, as you'll know, I'm sure you know, is political, because the winners don't thank you and the losers hate you. And it's a long and cumbersome process, which has been enormously disruptive in the past when governments have tried to do it. I think it was done in the 70s as well. So it's almost like the third rail of tax policy.
Now we're
No.
going to move to the ordering the disorder lightning round. Philip, if tariffs raise prices and distort markets, why do voters still reward certain politicians who impose them?
Because they don't understand what the impact will be, and until they're imposed. In fact, tariffs are not a popular policy now they've been imposed, according to opinion polls.
We all know on Liberation Day, Trump put on these crazy tariffs that ChatGPT probably invented based on its reading of the trade deficit with random countries, and even some countries inhabited only by penguins, like the Cook and McDonald Islands. Now we are discussing things in late November. There have been a million agreements, pauses, reinstatements. Do we actually have a tariff policy? And is it at all like what was announced on April 2nd?
It's only a bit like what was announced on April the 2nd, in that it's some of the levels that were announced on April the 2nd still apply, but it's subject to enormous amounts of exceptions. It's had lots of add-ons. I call it PTSD, permanent tariff stress disorder. He is announcing new tariffs on furniture, trucks, every other day. So we will not settle, I don't think, on a set tariff policy during a Trump presidency. There will always be changed.
What would you characterize this permanent state of chaos? Is there any specific sector or country that is targeted? Obviously, we know that it's mostly against China in some ways, but he seems to also fetishize traditional male Rust Belt kind of things like steel and autos, so that there is a kind of very antiquarian obsession with those industries, even though they're not that important now. How would you explain overall where we're at?
It's back to the 50s, really. He has a sort of nostalgia for the 1950s when, the big three car makers ruled the world. Men were men and women stayed at home, and everybody else knew their place. And he wants to kind of go back to that stage when manufacturing was a big sector of the US economy in terms of jobs. You can't go back there. Technology has changed, and no other country is going to get to those manufacturing levels, whether they've got a trade surplus or a trade deficit.
Of course. Have the chaotic tariffs in any way created more manufacturing jobs in those sectors? Have they in any way made the economy move more towards that 1950s vision?
Manufacturing jobs have declined under President Trump when they rose under President Biden. And the car industry is suffering because the steel and aluminum that it imports cost more.
Now, zooming out, because independent of what Trump does or doesn't understand, and whether or not he is an active and deliberate disorderer or merely an inadvertent one, could these tariffs be a backlash against globalization, whereby the meta reason of the collective will of humanity is a desire to revert towards a more protectionist world order, and the anti-globalization from the anti-WTO protests we saw in Seattle a million years ago to other stuff, and that Trump is a symptom. And therefore, although we talk about Trump ad nauseum, both you and I, you wrote a book about Trump, I've written 20 or more articles about him, might we be missing it by focusing constantly on this one, super intelligent man who can fight ISIS better than generals and can solve the economic problems better than Nobel Prize laureates, but we actually should be looking at larger historical and social figures?
Yes, I think you're right. It's a reaction against globalization. But I also think that, and this is a chapter of my book, that the US is a uniquely unequal society compared to most other OECD nations. And all those other OECD nations are dealing with globalization. It's not China's fault or the EU's fault that the US has no mandated holiday or sick pay or maternity leave, or it has weaker unemployment benefits or workers' rights in those other countries. That is all down to domestic policies. But if you're a populist, you can confuse the voter by saying it's down to globalization, not down to the people who are funding the Republican Party and often the Democratic Party too.
We both agree that no major economy can genuinely reshore supply chains through tariffs alone. And the idea of doing it isn't even beneficial because trade deficits actually show that you're a place that people want to invest in and that you have wealth, right? So a trade deficit is not a bad thing. Given that, if you were a Democrat running for office, let's say Pete Buttigieg or Gretchen Whitmer, what would you propose their economic policy to be, given that we're here now? You know what I mean? You can't say this was such a mistake because the people in America don't want to hear about that. They want to hear about the future. And they have very much punished politicians who only just criticize Trump, like Harris, rather than sketch out a new vision. So what should the vision be in the midterms and in 2028?
Well, I mean, it seems clear that affordability is the cause of the moment. Now, whether or not you can deliver on affordability is another question, but you can do in some sectors. You can cap prices, utilities, for example. You can do stuff to break up monopolies and try and bring down prices that way. And I don't know if you've had the authors of Abundance on the program, but I think there's a lot to be said for the abundance agenda. It's clear that the US, planning laws or whatever, are not built enough houses. If you could bring down the price of property, then that would make an enormous difference to affordability in US cities and would make US cities much more attractive for people to live in. So there's a whole bunch of things that you could do to increase supply that would help with the affordability agenda and are not, terribly unpopular in the country, I think.
To pivot to Britain, I was happy to hear about the third runway at Heathrow finally getting some go-aheads because I see the UK is even worse in its obsession with process rather than outcome. If you were reviewing Labour on the economy in its first 18 months, what would you say that they've actually achieved?
Well, not a lot. I mean, what they've done is address some measures of inequality. So solving the problems of public sector pay, or not solving them completely, but ameliorating the problems of public sector pay have been held back, and that stopped recruitment in some elements of the public sector, notably health. They have obviously pushed up the minimum wage. I think there's an argument that the minimum wage is now at the level that it might be threatening employment, which there are many economic studies about whether or not a higher minimum wage threatens employment. But certainly it's agreed that in principle it can reach that level. But I think the trouble is that policy making has been too chaotic. There have been too many leaks, too many false starts, and that there is to the public, there is no idea of what the aim of the Labour Party is. And that explains why it's unpopular. But I think there's a more general problem that faces Macron and Merz and many other leaders in Europe, that when the economy isn't growing very fast, then you're back to the zero-sum game problem, and voters get easily dissatisfied because the losers hate you and the winners don't thank you.
So you wrote The Economic Consequences of Mr. Trump, and we are featuring it alongside the New Books Network, where you can find out about lots of great books, many of them about neoliberal economics, many of them about economics and niche things like efficient markets hypothesis and ways to analyze ETFs and many interesting questions. Having written this, what is the one lesson that you would give to an American statesman about rebalancing the American economy, both its trade relationships and struggles with China, the weakness or overstrength of the dollar, depending on how you look at things, the overpreponderance of finance and growth in the financial and commoditization things rather than in the real economy? What's your one takeaway?
I think what really made America great was openness, both to trade and to immigration and to the allies that have supported it for much of the last 80 years. And what Trump could have done is say, China is not playing by the rules of the system. I am going to unite the rest of the world against China, which is acting aggressively towards its neighbors in the South China Sea, and use tariffs and try and get other countries to join in with tariffs against China. And then that would have weakened China's cards in some aspects. I think that's a much more positive way of doing the international trade. And I think domestically, you should be looking at that abundance agenda and talking about how can we solve some of the problems that have held back the US economy in terms of bottlenecks and inequality, which would be a significant way of improving things. It's not about the foreigners and the immigrants. It's about the way the US economy is structured.
I think that's exactly right. A return to a classically liberal agenda, particularly with the genius of creating a us versus them against hostile actors. And I would have said not just China, but China and Russia.
Russia, yeah.
And that's something that the Democrats could have done. Trump was running on this in 2016, and he failed to do it. If Biden had said, my whole purpose is to unite all of the allies, NATO and otherwise, to get the Gulf states, to get Latin American countries on our side against China and Russia, the Dems probably would have won the 2024 election. But he managed to have a falling out with our Gulfy allies and to be perceived quite poorly in the global South. It's really quite a tragedy, is it not? Because these are places that Putin and China say that they're helping, but they're not helping. So great answer to the penultimate question. Now the last question. The UK budget. It's not a disaster because the markets haven't tanked, pound sterling is up, all of that. What is the meaning vis-a-vis the UK's position with the EU? Those of us who are true Remainiacs, the only thing I care about British policy is, does it make it more likely that we can do a stealth rejoin? Where are we at on the one thing that actually matters?
Well, we are slightly ahead of where we were 18 months ago when Labour took office, in that there's the reset where we are trying to negotiate away some of the barriers. I think Labour regard the idea of opening up something more significant like joining the customs union as a Christmas present for Nigel Farage, which they don't want to open. So I think they think if they did that, the great problem with Brexit, apart from the impact on the economy, and the latest estimate is 6 to 8% of GDP,
Oh
is
my
it's
God.
so toxic that people don't want to hear about it anymore. You don't want to see these people anymore, and you don't want to hear about Brexit anymore. It was too divisive in the country, and to bring it back, I think it might be too dangerous for Labour. Even though I agree with you that it would be better if we could be back. Whether the EU would want us back without severe conditions, if we'd only cause trouble again, is another question.
Keir is so disliked throughout broad swaths of the country. Rachel Reeves is so disliked. Their attempt to triangulate and play the sides off against the middle has failed. They should just stealth rejoin and get the growth. Well, it has been a real pleasure to order the disorder with you, Philip.
Thank you, Jason, for having me on the show.